Alright, so you can see we've got our shapes all determined here, so now let's add some colors. The way I went about this was by going to Adobe Coolers, or color.adobe.com, and searching through some of the sort of, shall we say, themes they had available on their main page. Now this was kind of neat, that would look kind of cool, oranges and blues, sort of pastels. This also looks kind of neat. There are several things you look at that kind of have them themed by color. But what I ultimately ended up doing was just searching up garden, which was just a random word I had to come pop up my head. If you want to look up something different, you can. I really do suggest that you do something different from what I've got. But what I've done here is in the options over here, I downloaded this as a .ase file, which is basically a series of swatches. So going over to our color windows, or in this case, our swatches window, we can go to another library and find where we saved it. And we'll load the swatches that we had saved earlier into our Adobe Illustrator here. So in this case, we can see that we've got those swatches there. Now with the color guide open, what I ended up doing was I ended up creating a series of shadows and highlights that I can apply to different areas of the skin. So started off by just make sure that you've got your fill sort of highlighted over here on the left hand side. So what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to apply the stroke, but you gotta make sure you just click on the fill, and that'll allow you to sort of select the different objects to make a new fill. So one by one, I went through and I created a series of fills here that reflected this little pattern. And essentially what I did there is I duplicated it to create a shadows and a highlights. So once again, you gotta make sure this the little symbol on the side there, the sort of open square is your stroke, and then the solid square is your fill. So make sure the solid square is in the foreground when you're going through your color guide. Otherwise, you won't be able to select it here. Right. So I'm going through this. I'm creating my highlights at this point, and then what I'm going to do is duplicate this off to the other side. I'll make some shadows. Let's drag this over here, and I'll make some shadows. So I'm just going to click on my color guide and just use some of the tints here to make some shadows. So what I'm doing here is I'm going through and just getting these sort of darker shades. Not so dark that it's going to kill the color here, but dark enough to look different. So with all this done, I've got a nice little array of colors I can use. Now, when you do this, you can use whatever color you'd like. Obviously, what I ended up doing here was choosing a series of colors that don't really correspond much to the natural color of the person's skin. So I'm not going to sample the actual photo here. What I will do is I will just sort of choose a random color. And notice I made a little copy of the artboard off to the side. We'll do a couple different things here. And I'm basically just using the shadows and the highlights to create a series of shadows and highlights based around this person's face here, right? So I'm using the different tints of green to color in the different shadows and stuff. I had to move the shadow to the side so I can make room for it. Notice that at this point I have a yellow stroke on everything, so I can go in here and I can just eliminate the stroke just because the color that I had sampled, a little swatch I had sampled, also had a yellow stroke. I'm going to adjust the opacity of several of these shadows just so I can make sure that it's not killing, like it's not, I want the shadows to be subtle enough to not be noticeable in as far as their own shapes, but I also want them to be noticeable enough to be somewhat recognizable, be able to feel the shadows and not so much like see the shadows. For the hair, I'm choosing pink. I don't know why I defaulted to green and pink. I just sort of like had them there. I thought the green looked good. I thought the pink looked good. She ends up looking like a poison ivy from Batman. Instead of coloring the eyebrows the same color as everything else as her hair, I went ahead and just had all the blacks be sort of one single dark color. So in this case, I want to say I used this blue down here and just darkened it up here. So I'm sort of copying all this stuff with using the same fill color select tool and just dragging down my opacity here. So my B on the brightness scale, HSB. For the lips, I chose this other color here, something subtle. And then for same with the gums, I wanted to make the gums be around the same color as the mouth, but not so bright that they sort of like were invisible to the teeth. So. And I went ahead and made the lips two different colors, but just sort of lighten up the top lip just a little bit. All right, so the other option you have is instead of using, say, for instance, the same color tone and different tints for the various things, is for instance, what you could do is you could actually. So I'm going to lock all this over here just for a second. What you could do is actually use different colors, like opposing colors, inside the same area. So you notice right here, I've got gray on the background with my hair. That looks kind of neat. In this case, I'm going to use blue as the base skin tone and use green as the shadows and highlights. This again is one of those things that different people will have different eyes. You'll look at this stuff and you'll think to yourself, oh, okay, well this looks good. Or if I have pink hair with like yellow highlights or darker yellow shadows or something like that might look good too. Again, you look at this. I wasn't super satisfied with this by the end of it all. I was actually rather like this one right here. So I'm gonna kind of go with this one, but that's always an option. Is opposing sort of colors for the different areas of the shadows. Once you have your colors finalized, you can just select your little color palette here, move it away from the main screen, grab your rectangle tool, and make a new layer above your background here. Just add in a new rectangle. And from there, what you can do is I would probably go in there and fill it up with a gradient. So I would apply a gradient, and once you're there, go over here to your window, gradient tools. You can go over to fill and find gradient options, and you can fill it in with whatever colors you like. In this case, because we have pink and green, I might choose something maybe more towards the bluish side. Let's see how that looks. Okay, that's good. And it looks like I've got that all situated here. All right, and so once you have that done, you can just export this as a JPEG with your export for screens. And when you press export for screens, you'll notice that you'll have the choice of both artboards showing up. I'm going to uncheck this one artboard over here. I'll export this. All right, and so we should be able to see this thing on here. So one thing to note, I made a couple different versions of this. For instance, this one right here, I created a little design kind of cut out into the background, added some shapes here to put onto the background, sort of like as if there were two backgrounds to it. You can do that on the same layer. I also went into Photoshop and added a lens flare and a few other things like grunge things and a filter with the using the little pop art brush. So you can apply things like that if you'd like. And we'll call this done. And what we'll do from here is we'll move on to our own drawings, and we'll make we'll see if we can't complete one this week and another one next week. All right, very cool. Can't wait to see you guys produce in class.